What's up guys, and welcome back to a Pokemon Sun and Moon coverage video, and today's video is going to be basically speculating on what new Pokemon we might see in Sun and Moon. This is going to be a variation of different things, like how many Pokemon are we going to see, what types might they be, are we going to see more of one type than others, what legendary types might we get, what fossil types might we get, and also what mega evolutions might we get, and how many from each generation. So we'll start off with the basic sort of broad one, and to do all this speculation I'm going to be using stats and figures from the existing Pokemon. So first up, Pokemon per generation have been introduced. If we look at each one, in Generation 1 there were 151 introduced, because obviously there's the original Pokemon. Generation 2 upped to 251 with an extra 100. Generation 3 then added another 135 on top. Generation 4 was 107, and then Generation 5, which was like pretty much a reboot, if you guys get what I mean. That's why there was a big bulk, because the whole region was new Pokemon. If you guys remember, in Generation 5 for Black and White, there were no old Pokemon, at least in before the Elite Four, there were no old Pokemon, so it was like you had to fill a whole region up, whereas at least with Generation 4 and 3, and obviously in 2 as well, you've at least had some older Pokemon come in as well, so you haven't had to bulk it up too much. Because if there was only say 100, 120 Pokemon in Generation 5, and you wanted it simply to be all these Pokemon before the Elite Four, maybe 20 of these Pokemon are going to be post-game or very high-level Pokemon or legendary Pokemon, so it means you've only got 100 Pokemon out of those to actually use for just general stuff, which means you haven't got a huge amount of choice, assuming most of those, on average they are there's 2 Pokemon per evolution line on average, so you've only got 50 evolution lines to choose from. Obviously not all of them are available, some of them are the same type, so you guys get what I mean. If they didn't introduce this many in Generation 5, there would simply be not enough, to go around. It would make it very stale. Generation 6, as we know, only introduced 72 new Pokemon, which is not many, but as I mentioned, obviously it's similar to the previous generations before Gen 5, it featured a lot of Pokemon from previous generations. I mean, the Kalos Dex was huge. I think it's the biggest dex we've ever had. So it's got, as well as these new Pokemon, you had all the old ones at the same time. So, talking about this information, how many Pokemon might we get in Generation 7? Well, if we look at them, there's actually a small trend for these gens. If you see, for Gen 1 and 2, you see there's a large, big bar and then a smaller bar for Gen 2. Gen 3, there's a larger bar and then a smaller bar for Gen 4. Gen 5, again, there's the biggest bar and then there's a smaller bar for Generation 6. This may be linked, so every 2 generations it repeats a pattern. The first generation gives you a big boost in the Pokemon, the second one introduces some, a good amount, but not too many. It sort of bolsters what we had. Same with Generation 3 and 4, and then 5. Now, this is possibly my hypothesis of why we didn't get as many Pokemon in Generation 6. Because we got so many in Generation 5, they thought, right, we introduced far too many Pokemon last time, because if you guys remember, what memorable Pokemon are there from Generation 5? Apart from Legendaries and stuff, a lot of the Pokemon went sort of under the radar. People didn't really care about them. A lot of people hated a lot of Pokemon, of the Generation 5 Pokemon. Hence, maybe why they said, right, okay, let's actually focus on getting some decent Pokemon out. 70 decent Pokemon rather than 150 average Pokemon. So maybe Generation 7 is where we get a big boost of Pokemon. I mean, it would make sense as well, since a lot of people complained in Generation 6 that we didn't get many. It's like, oh, we only got 70 new Pokemon, what the fuck is this? So maybe Game Freak will take on that advice. They've had a bit of extra time to develop new Pokemon, I guess, since, not extra time than they usually would have, but they might have said, as soon as they sort of got the complaints in, I guess they were, of not enough Pokemon, they might have said, right, okay, let's start creating some a decent amount of good Pokemon. So I would estimate the new Pokemon we're going to get for Generation 7 to be somewhere around 120. If you look at sort of, assuming Generation 7 is going to be the big boost again, like we have for Generation 1, 3, and 5, we can see 1 was 150, 3 was 135, and Generation 5 was 156. I doubt they're going to bring in as many as Generation 1 or Generation 5, because 1 was sort of, the start. Generation 5 was the one that no one really cares about, so I would assume they're going to introduce as many Pokemon as they did for Generation 3 generally, so 135 new Pokemon, 130 Pokemon, 120 Pokemon, something around that area. I wouldn't expect them to only introduce about, the same amount as Generation 6, because of all the complaints they got. And as I said, we're due for a big boost. Of course, they could say, okay, we're only going to introduce another 100 Pokemon, go in the middle, because obviously the reason they most likely did, not have as many in Generation 6, as well as the complaints from Generation 5, was the fact that they don't want to oversaturate Pokemon, basically. It's already getting a bit oversaturated. You ask anybody that plays Pokemon, they can most likely name Pokemon from Generation 1, maybe 2 and 3, but as soon as you get to Generation 4, and especially Generation 5 and definitely Generation 6, they won't be able to name any Pokemon. It's so oversaturated. There's far too many Pokemon. In each game, in each generation we go, it becomes harder and harder to catch them all, which obviously is one of the lines of the game. So if say they introduced the same amount of Pokemon each year, or each generation, so 150 per generation, we'd be now 6 generations in, which means we'd have 900 Pokemon, which we have like 712, I think, so 900 is 200 more than we currently have. Can you imagine how hard it would be to catch them all, especially when you add on Generation 7? As soon as you get to Generation 8, you're up to like, 1,200 Pokemon. That's a lot of Pokemon. As soon as we hit the 1,000 mark, people are going to start writing Pokemon off, I feel, at least, saying, there's too many Pokemon. They'll start, reviewers will start complaining, saying too many Pokemon, it's gone down the drain, sort of thing. So that's another reason why they might be lowering the number of Pokemon per generation. But I expect it still to be somewhere around 120 Pokemon for this generation. So what types might we see? Are we going to see, a particular amount of this type, or this type, or this type? Well, first, before we decide that, let's have a look at the stats again and have a look at how many Pokemon are existing of each type. So here's the graph for number of Pokemon of each type as of Generation 6, and you can see the highest peak is at Water. Water is the most common type in Pokemon. Now, bear in mind, this graph takes into account, it doesn't take into account Mega Evolutions, I'm pretty sure. I don't think it takes into account alternate forms as well. So this is sort of like the bare bones. However, if Pokemon has 2 types, say it's Water Ground like Quagsire, there'll be 1 entry for Water, 1 entry for Ground. So it's basically a graph of how many times each type appears in the National Pokédex. So as I said, Water is the most common type. The second most common type actually is Normal, and about 94, I think, maybe just a bit more. So the second most common type is Water, and then it goes down to Flying at 93, and then Grass is down there at 87, and we go obviously further down. The least common type, as you can see here, is actually the Ghost type. Even though Fairy was only just introduced in the last generation, because of all the type changes beforehand, it's actually quite common. So the Ghost type and the Ice type actually are the 2 lowest appearing types in the National Pokédex, with only 35 appearances each, which isn't very high. Going up from that, you can see we also have types like Dark and Steel, as well as Dragon and Fairy. I mean, Dragon and Fairy makes sense because they are supposed to be the rarer types, and even like Ghost and Ice and Steel make sense because they are rarer types. It's not like they're Grass, Water, Fire, or any other sort of variation like that. One thing I do want to pick out here and point out is Fire. Look at the Fire type. You can see it's there. It's just under 60. I think it's 59. No, it's 60 exactly. But it's actually fairly low. If you look at Grass and Water right next to it, they're pretty high. Grass is up at sort of 85, and then Water is even higher. So I would predict that a decent amount of Fire types get introduced in the next generation. At least a decent amount, especially if the Hawaii basis comes in, because then people, Hawaii is fairly sunny, it's hot, so Fire types would be more common in that area, I would think. But I think Fire types are going to make a boom in Generation 7. Other types that might appear a bit more in Generation 7 could be something like a Poison type, or definitely the Fighting type. You can see that's fairly low as well, even lower than Fire. And the Electric type as well. I mean, Electric, yes, it's always been the rarest of sort of, the 4 main types, Fire, Fire, Grass, Water, Electric. But I feel like there should be more Electric types. There's only 48 appearances of the Electric type across the whole National Pokédex, which isn't very high at all. So I feel like, it should appear a bit more. I mean, types like, Dragon, Ice, Fairy, Steel, they make sense that they're rarer, because obviously they're not, you don't want every other Pokemon to be a Dragon type, whereas if every other Pokemon is a Water type, you don't mind quite as much, because it's not as powerful a type. However, I don't expect to see that many new Water types introduced, just because look how many there are. There are 124 appearances of the Water type, mostly because a lot of, you have a lot of dual types there, but also because a lot of, you need water in every region, which means you need a lot of water types in every region, basically, so the surfing area isn't isn't as boring, basically, so you don't get Tentacle every time. So it's not like a Zubat cave, The way they might remedy this and say, okay, you know, we don't have to introduce many water types, but we can still make it diverse, is by adding in Generation 6 Pokemon. You know, there were a few water type Pokemon introduced in Generation 6. You have Clauncher? Something like that. And you have Skrelp is a water type. So you can actually add those to the region as well. This region does not have to exclusively be new Pokemon. As we said, this Generation 7 should be the boom region, and in Generation 3 was a boom generation, I should say, actually, in which case it was more Pokemon were introduced, but you still had a decent amount of Pokemon from previous generations that appeared, like Geodude. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but there are some, so you can expect to see some Generation 6 Pokemon appear in Generation 7 games before the Elite Four. So if we move off of sort of, Pokemon types and we look at Legendaries now. So basically what we might see the Legendaries of Sun and Moon being, not necessarily the exclusive ones, but also Legendary Trios, and just other specific Legendaries. Here is a graph of the number of Legendaries of each type, and you can see here, straight off the bat, you can see Psychic is the most common Legendary type. Obviously that's because we have Mew and Mewtwo, as well as the Lake Guardian Trio, which is another 3 of them. I can't think of any of those off the top of my head, but there are quite a few. You know, you've got Celebi, which is Psychic type as well. There are loads of Pokemon, legendary Pokemon, which have the Psychic type as part of them. So I very much doubt we're going to see many Psychic type Legendaries in this Generation 7. We might get 1, maybe even 2, but I don't think we'll get many because there are far too many to begin with. You can also see the second highest are Flying and Dragon. They're tied, so I think every generation so far has introduced at least one Flying type Legendary, so I wouldn't be surprised if another one is introduced this time, because it would just carry on the trend. But I don't think we're going to get too many Dragon type Legendaries either. We didn't get any, well, we got 1 in Generation 6, as in Zygarde, but we didn't get any more than that. So again, I think we're only going to get 1, maybe 2. Because they simply just, Dragon makes sense for a Legendary, but we have seen so many Dragon Legendaries before. Obviously, back in Hone, you've got Rayquaza, then in Generation 4 you've got Dialga, Palkia and Giratina, and then in Generation 5 you have Zekrom, Reshiram and Zygarde, Kyurem. So, 2 generations in a row had sort of Dragon trios. They make sense for Legendaries, but you can't use them every time. Overusing them just doesn't make any sense. You can see there actually, there is one type that has never been used for a legendary Pokemon, and that is the Poison type. Yes, you could argue Arceus in its Poison form would be a Poison type, but no, there is no Poison type legendary. So this strongly announces to me that the Generation 7 Legendaries have a chance of having at least one Poison type Legendary in there. I very much believe there will be at least one, because otherwise it's just, Poison's so poor, he's all on his own. There are no Poison type Legendaries, but Poison was the one of the most common types to get introduced in Generation 1, so it's really been left behind. Other low types you can see there are Bug, as in only having one Legendary, which is Genesect, and then the other low ones are Fairy. There's only 2 there, so you might get another Fairy Legendary, because obviously just boost it up. Because the 2 existing ones are Diancie and Xerneas. Then of that we have Ghost, which only has 2 legendaries as well, Giratina and Hooper, I think it is. I've classed Hooper's forms as two Pokemon here, so you have, one Ghost is classed, and then one is Dark and one is Psychic, so that's how it's classed there. So yeah, I'd expect at least one Poison type Legendary. I mean, probably not 2 Poison type Legendaries. The Poison type Legendary, a Fairy, probably a Ghost as well. Normal and Grass, yeah, there aren't many, but you probably don't need another one at the moment. Bug, probably see another Bug one as well. What will the 2 Legendaries of Sun and Moon be? Well, generally, usually before it's been in something that relates to each other, like Groudon was ground, Kyogre was water, ground water, it was ground, and then water is the sea. Before that, obviously, there weren't any before that, I don't think. Well, Ho-Oh and Lugia haven't really been related to each other, but past that we had Zekrom and Reshiram, we had Fire Dragon, Electric Dragon, sort of balanced out there, and then Dialga and Palkia, Steel Dragon, Water Dragon, balances there. So they're similar typings. However, for Generation 6, we had Xerneas, which is Fairy type, and then Yveltal, which is Dark Flying type, which I don't count this on me, but I think this is that was the first time that the 2 main legendaries had different amounts of types, I guess. Don't quote me on that though. I think that's the case though. So it's likely that Generation 7 Legendaries don't necessarily have a similar typing. They could be whatever they want. because I think Pokemon is trying to break away from that. So it's likely that the Sun Legendary is a fire type of some description. Whether or not it has an extra type to add on to that, I'm not too sure if it would need it, because what are we going to add? Definitely not grass or water. Electric, fire electric for a sun, I guess that might work, since the sun does have a lot to do with electromagnetism and such. Ground, it's not going to work for a sun really, neither is rock. Fighting and flying, new. Poison, psychic, maybe psychic, but I can't see that too much. Ghost, dark, bug, steel, ice, dragon, and a fire dragon. You've already had a fire dragon legendary, I wouldn't see it happening. And fairy, I doubt it. So fire for the sun legendary would make sense, because we haven't had a fire type legendary since Reshiram, or main one at least. And for the moon legendary, maybe a fairy type there. However, we just had a fairy type in Xerneas, so it might not be the case. I'd say maybe a dark type there again, but obviously we've had a dark type in Yveltal. Ghost could make a possible appearance, because thinking about the moon is very mysterious. You only see it at night when it's dark, when it's spooky, and it's obviously sort of, if you look at the light from the logo for the moon version, it's sort of a very light blue light, which Ghost does fit into in some cases. So Ghost is a possible type there. Ice is also a very strong type to see that, because sort of the moon is all cold, so ice would make a lot of sense, whereas you have the sun, which is nice and hot. The moon is icy cold. Not icy cold, but you guys get the idea. So ice might work there. Even if the sun legendary would be super effective against the moon legendary, it would make a bit of sense, because obviously the moon gets its light in real life from the sun. So for the sun to be more powerful, for the sun legendary to be more powerful than the moon legendary, would make a lot of sense. So I think ice might make a good appearance for the moon type legendary. In terms of what other legendaries we might get apart from moon sun, there might be an eclipsed legendary area, because that is sort of the middle between sun and moon, and we usually have one of those. Might not be related to them directly, but eclipse I would see being a psychic type, maybe a psychic poison type, since it's sort of the eclipse between two things. If you think of an eclipse, you think of a dark bit, which is the moon in front of the sun, and then you think of a light bit, which is the sun, the other side. So poison, psychic, maybe, possibly, who knows. That would be my prediction there, though. In terms of other Pokemon legendaries, as I mentioned already, we could see a bug type come through here. So in terms of what trios or pairings we might get, I can't make any predictions on those, but I could see some sort of some unused types coming to fruition there. So that's pretty much it for the legendaries. Now if we go on to something else I thought about, which was pseudo legendaries, because those are sort of the next step down from legendaries. So looking back at what each, similar to, taken each pseudo legendary, taken each type, and basically recorded the number of appearances of each type. And here's the graph. As you can see, Dragon is the most common type to appear in a pseudo legendary, which is at 5, because you have, let me try and remember here, Dragonite, Salamence, Goodra, Garchomp, and Hydreigon. There we are, 5 there. So that's what there. And then other common appearances, we have Ground, Rock, Flying, Psychic, Dark, and Steel. Now Psychic, Dark, and Steel makes sense because they're sort of the higher level types, and Ground, Rock, Flying do make a bit of sense as well, because they're like secondary types almost. So what might we see from Pseudo Legendary in Generation 7? Well, Dragon is very likely to come up again. The last one we got was a Dragon, albeit a pure Dragon. So it's very likely if Dragon turn up again. However, I would like to see a different type to accompany it than one of the ones currently on here. Could you imagine a sort of a Dragon? I mean, we've had Dragon Poison with Dragolg, so we don't really want to see that. Can you imagine Dragon Steel? I think we've had Dragon Steel with Dialga, but can you imagine that was Pseudo Legendary, which is a bit a full evolution chain? Dragon Fairy, we've had for Mega Altaria, but it would still make a good choice. Dragon Ice, we've had it for Kyurem, but Kyurem obviously you can't use in too many battles because it's a legendary, so a Dragon Ice type would be interesting to see. Or maybe even Dragon Fire, we've had that with Mega Charizard X, of course, but it would still make an awesome legendary. In terms of what else you could have for the Pseudo Legendary, there are loads of options. However, if you pick one, you've probably heard of it before, like Dragon Electric. Oh wait, we had Zekrom, Dragon Ground with Garchomp. Dragon Fighting might be a very strong one to have. I don't think we had a Dragon Fighting type before, so having that as a Pseudo Legendary would be awesome to see. Can you imagine like a Fighting Dragon type? That would be really awesome, because it would be awesome, super powerful, really high attack and speed maybe, and then obviously lower defenses, but it would still have a very high stat total being a Pseudo Legendary. Other things I looked at here, we're looking at the fossil Pokemon now, and what fossil types we might see in Generation 6. Obviously we have fossils in each generation. Gen 1 we had Kabuto and Omanity. Generation 2, actually, thinking about it, I don't think we had any fossils then. If I'm correct, I don't know. Obviously we have Aerodactyl as well, but I don't think we had any fossils in Gen 2. Gen 3 we had Laleep and Anorith. Generation 4 we had Cranidos and Shieldon. Generation 5 we had Tortuga, and this is from memory, guys. Tortuga and Archon. And then Generation 6 obviously we had Tyrant and Amora. So looking at the Pokemon, the types here, I'm not including Rock in all this total. As you can see here, instead of Rock on the graph, we have Pure Rock, so that's a Pure Rock type as in Cranidos, and you can see there's only been one of those. Obviously you can't have half a Pokemon, so it's just how the graph's gone. But you can see the most common one is obviously Water as a secondary type, since we had that 3 times. Then it is Flying, because obviously Aerodactyl and Archon. And then going off down we've had Grass, Bug, Steel, Ice and Dragon all crop up. So what else might we see from a fossil type, or fossil Pokemon? Well, if we go on the list and sort of see how it would work, a Rock Normal type for a Legendary, for a fossil Pokemon, I don't think that's going to work too much. I mean, it works for some types like Fire Normal, but it doesn't work for Rock Normal in my opinion at least. Rock Fire, I would love to see that. Again, if the region is based on Hawaii, can you imagine like an ancient fossil Pokemon that has, can breathe fire, and it's a rock, rock breathe fire, something like that. Obviously water we don't want. Rock Electric, it sort of works, it sort of doesn't. Can you imagine an electric type Pokemon in medieval times? Maybe it would be like, I don't know, maybe I'm thinking like maybe it would be like in a fish, some fish will have the little angler things which sometimes relate to electricity, so that might make sense there. But apart from that, I'm not really feeling it. Rock Ground, not feeling that at all, pleased to have it. I know a Pure Rock is a possibility, but we've had Cranidos, we don't really need to see another of those. Rock Fighting, again, Fighting doesn't really seem like a type you would see in prehistoric times. It's not like a natural type, you have to learn to fight, so it doesn't really work in there in my opinion. Rock Poison is a possibility if you have, thinking back, maybe you had like a really, a poisonous snake or something, venomous snake. Rock Poison would make sense in that sort of case there. Rock Psychic, again, Psychic doesn't really seem like a natural type, I guess, so I don't feel like that would work. Rock Ghost is a possibility, because Ghost seems natural, so maybe sort of like a ghostly rock formation that would be attacking, something along those lines. Rock Dark, again, it doesn't seem like too much of a natural type. Maybe if it was like a villainous, if it was like sort of Aerodactyl where it's off on its own. Maybe if it was like a single Rock Dark, sort of like a I don't know what type of what basis it would be, what dinosaur might be based off of, but Rock Dark could work. We've obviously had Bug, Steel, Ice, Dragon before. Rock Fairy, it could work, but I can't see that happening. Because Fairy just seems like too much of a modern type. It wouldn't make sense to have it in prehistoric times, but that's my opinion, of course. Now we move on to our final section here, which is covering Mega Evolutions, what everyone cares about. So, first up, the first chart, graph, whatever we have here is of the number of Mega Evolutions of each type. So similar to what we've seen before, but taking each Mega Evolution, recording how many times each type appears, and then recording it on the graph. So you can see, if I show it to you, the most common Mega Evolution type is Psychic. Now this might be a bit blurred because obviously you have 2 Mewtwo Mega Evolutions, so it's counted twice there, but it's the same thing for Fire, and there's hardly any Fire ones. After that we have Dragon being the second most. Again, this is a bit blurred because we have Latias and Latios both having Mega Evolutions, as well as Rayquaza, which is Dragon type as well. So that's where that might be blurred a bit, but apart from that you can see some of the other common ones are Fighting, Flying, Dark, Steel, and Fairy almost. So sort of almost the less common types get more Mega Evolutions. The ones with the least amount of Mega Evolutions are Electric and Ice here, so I definitely see a good amount of Mega Evolutions for those types coming through for Generation 7, as well as possibly Grass as well, and also Rock, Poison and Ghost. They haven't got too many either, so if you're looking to balance the other types, you need to definitely give some Mega Evolutions to that. We can assume we are going to get Mega Evolutions for the Johto starters, because we've got Mega Evolutions for Kanto in Generation 6, and also for Hoenn when we had the remakes, so we can assume maybe we get the Mega Evolutions for the Johto starters at the start of Generation 7, and then when maybe if the Generation 4 remakes come out, we get Mega Evolutions for the Sinnoh starters there. So that would make a lot of sense. The only starters that wouldn't then have Mega Evolutions would be Generation 5 and Generation 6, and also Generation 7, depending on how they do it. They could also add Mega Evolutions for those in this game, but they could leave that for Generation 8 if they really wanted to. So we can, if we assume we're at least getting free to start off with, you know, Mega Typhlosion, Mega Meganium, and Mega Feraligatr. They're obviously Fire, Grass, Water, so there's one each for those. And maybe they sort of, you know, change types around, so maybe Typhlosion becomes Fire Electric, because it is like a fast moving Pokemon, so Fire Electric would make a lot of sense for it, in my opinion, so that would fix one there. Maybe they would make Feraligatr to be Water Ice, to be like some sort of Ice Crocodile, maybe. And then maybe Meganium takes on Poison as a possibility, I don't know. Or maybe even Rock types, yeah, like a nice big bulky Meganium, I don't know. Those are ideas, guys, but yes, I do expect to see more electric Mega Evolutions, as well as Ice, and also a couple more Grass, Rock, and Ghost as well. But how many Mega Evolutions are we going to get added, and where will they be coming from? So let's look at how many Mega Evolutions we have currently for Pokemon from each generation. Is the graph. You can see there is a very big disparity here. Number of Mega Evolutions per generation. Generation 1 we have 15. Generation 2 we have 6. Generation 3 we have 20. Generation 4 there are 5. Generation 5 there's 1. Generation 6 there is also 1. So I expect to see basically no Mega Evolutions from Generation 3. They are done on that front for Mega Evolutions. We had a whole remake where Mega Evolutions were added to that region, so we don't need them anymore. We do not need them anymore, because we have 20. I mean, as we said, there were how many Pokemon added in Generation 3? 135. So 20 out of 135. That's, I think off the top of my head here, that's about a sixth of all the Pokemon, just under a sixth. Of all the Pokemon introduced in Generation 3 have Mega Evolutions. That's including all the initial stage Pokemon as well. If you got rid of those and just looked at fully evolved Pokemon, I would say probably about a half to a third of the fully evolved Pokemon in Hoenn have Mega Evolutions. You really can't add any more on without completely oversaturating that there and making basically every Hoenn Pokemon have a Mega Evolution. I don't see it happening at all, ever, no. I mean, maybe we'll add 1 or 2 more if you need to, but I don't expect to see many at all. Same sort of case for Generation 1, obviously not as many, only 15 here, but again, if you look at fully evolved Pokemon from Generation 1, there's probably about 80 of them, so you still have a good chunk having Mega Evolutions already. Johto only has 5. As I said, we're expecting to see 3 more there for each of the starters, so that would boost it up to 8 at least, so I'm expecting a few more there as well, considering that we got a decent amount of Generation 1 Mega Evolutions in Generation 6, so having a few more for Johto, you know, to sort of boost it up to the same level in Generation 7 would make a hell of a lot of sense. I also expect to see a decent amount, I mean, maybe not in the first games for Generation 7, because obviously, if we imagine first game Generation 7 are X and Y. X and Y introduced, obviously, Mega Evolutions for Kanto starters, as well as, majorly, Mega Evolutions, a decent amount of Mega Evolutions from Generation 1, a few from Generation 3, and then 1 or 2 dotted elsewhere. So if we imagine we're just shifting a gen up, Generation 7 is going to introduce a decent amount for Generation 2 in Sun and Moon, I should say, so boost it up to similar levels as Generation 1, and then a few dotted elsewhere. Then, if we get Generation 4 remakes, similar to Generation 3 remakes, when we got loads of Mega Evolutions for Hoenn, I expect to see loads of Mega Evolutions for Sinnoh, boosting the total of 5 up to about 15, maybe even 20 if they go crazy, adding a few more there, because even if they wanted to, they could change it around so you could have Mega Dialga, Mega Palkia, something along those lines, because we had the Primals for Generation 3. They could do Megas, or they could do something else, or they could leave it as is, because they might want to step it up a bit, step up the the game a bit, I guess, in the Generation 4 remake. Because of course they are remakes, you sometimes want to add a bit of extra there. Then, I mean, as we go in both sets of games for Generation 7, I expect a few more for Generation 5 and Generation 6. Obviously Generation 6 is fairly recent still, so I wouldn't expect too many there. I wouldn't even be surprised if there weren't any at all, because they are very recent, the Pokemon. But at least some more in Generation 5. But I wouldn't be surprised to see some in Generation 6, because we have moved on one. I mean, we got a Mega Evolution for Generation 5 in Gen 6, so it's not sort of, you can't rule it out completely. So I'd expect to see a good amount for Generation 5, maybe boost it up to about just under 10, maybe 8 or 9, and then maybe I have 2 or 3 for Generation 6, but not a huge amount. So generally, how many Megas are we looking to introduce? Well, if we count up the total there for each generation, you can see 15, 5, 15, 6, that's 21, adding on 20, that's 41, 46, 47, 48. There are 48 Mega Evolutions currently in the game. I'm not too sure how many were introduced in X and Y at the start and how many came in Oras, but I would expect to see about 20 more coming in Sun and Moon, then obviously an extra 20 more coming in Pokemon, I don't know, Temporal Diamond and Spatial Pearl, or whatever games came after that. And you see that those 40 more combined with these 48, that would be 98, almost 100 Pokemon. So if we assume that the new Pokemon introduced in Generation 7 total up to about 850, 100 out of 850 of those Pokemon have Mega Evolutions, which is quite a lot if you think about it. So don't expect a huge boom of Mega Evolutions, but expect a good few at least. Talking about Mega Evolutions in Generation 7 as well, are we going to see any? It's possible, but I'm not going to hold my breath. We could see 1 or 2 maybe, as we saw Diancie had a Mega Evolution for Generation 6, but you know, maybe they do it for another Legendary in Generation 7, but I can't see it being too common a thing, unless of course they introduce it for the starters, just particularly for the starters, so they don't have to go back in later generations and add them. It's a possibility, but we have to see. So that sort of sums up this video. Leave any thoughts you have down below. There's a lot of information I've gone over there, so if you really want to, you can go back over each topic. I'll go through them again. Number of Pokemon per generation. How many Pokemon do you think we are going to see in Generation 7 added? Put your prediction down below in the comment section now. Then, what types do you think are going to be majorly focused on in Generation 7? Are we going to see more fire types than anything else, or are we going to see just a good spread, or can you not tell? What types of Legendary is going to be? Can you see a Poison type Legendary coming through? Can you see an Ice type Legendary coming through? Bug? Any ideas you got there, guys? What type Legendaries are we going to get? You can talk about Pseudo Legendaries if you want, but it's not really a huge point. But do you think we're going to see Dragon Fire, Dragon Electric, anything like that? Let me know what your prediction for the Pseudo Legendary is. Then Fossil Pokemon. What Fossil Pokemon would you like to see in Generation 7? Do you want to see a Rock Fire? That would be my sort of like my highest one. Rock Fire, maybe a Rock Fighting as well. I mean, it's not quite as likely, or Rock Poison maybe. Those would be my top choices there. And then finally on to Mega Evolutions. How many Mega Evolutions would you like to see introduced in Generation 7? If you want Mega Evolutions to come back at all, if you want them to stay as a Generation 6 exclusive, let me know down in the comment section. I'd be really interested to know how many people actually feel that way. If you do want them back though, let me know what sort of spread you'd like. Do you want to see loads of Generation 2 Legendaries, Generation 4 Legendaries, or do you want to just dive straight into Generation 5 and Generation 6? Let me know down below in the comment section, guys. I'd be really interested to know what thoughts any of you have. Let's have a cool discussion about this whole coverage area. But this is it for me for today, guys. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit the like button. I'd be really appreciative of that. But for now, this is it for me for today. I'll be seeing you next time. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, my friends.